Welcome to Leadership and Life Chat with your hosts, me, Becky Ames.
And me, Mark Curtis. In each episode, we'll be illustrating how success in leadership is inextricably linked with success in life.
Whether it's leadership in business, society, family or friends, we're all leaders.
Using our experiences and a range of expert guests, we'll share secrets to boosting your health, wealth and self.
So let's get on with the show.
Becky, this week, I want to take a topic which we haven't actually covered on the podcast before. And that topic is Generation Z. So I've listened to a podcast just recently, The Great Simplification with Nate Hagens, and he had a guest on called Professor Jonathan Haidt, and he's a social psychologist. And he was looking into what is happening with Generation Z, because he's an educational teacher, or was as well as an author, and he was noticing that in the classrooms there was a sea change in behaviours and issues with the class, and this happened around 2012 2013, and he started looking into it. So to cut a long story short, because I'm not going to do that podcast, if anyone wants to have a listen, please follow the link in the show notes, because it is a great podcast. And he's basically found through his research that if you compare Generation Z to millennials, there's kind of double the anxiety levels, double the stress levels, double the self-harm levels, double depression. There's some serious stuff going on with a psychological level with Generation Z. So anyway, he's looked into it. Part of it's to do with social media, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not what this podcast is really about, Becky, is it? This is about leadership. So one of the things he was talking about is that Generation Z effectively are referred to sometimes by the derogatory term, which we've probably all heard, which is snowflake. And actually, I think I understand where that comes from now, because he was very much talking around this generation. They were not taught to self-govern, so they were cocooned. They're not allowed to take any risks. Be careful, that could be dangerous. It's stuff that we would have done as kids growing up in the 70s and 80s, Becky. Careering around on our rally choppers or whatever it would have been. Falling off, grazing our knee, getting back on again. It appears that this generation were not exposed to that. So everything has become like within an inch of its life, bacterial spray here, everything is like frightening, and they're cocooned. And with social media perhaps pushing some of that stuff, becoming more isolated, it appears that some of this stuff, according to Professor Haidt's research, this is what's causing some of the challenges. Now, I was listening to this and I was thinking, do you know what? This is a really, really serious topic, because these people are now anything from, say, mid-20s downwards in terms of age. Yeah. And they're going to be in the workplace. And some of them are soon, if they're not already, going to become leaders, the next generation leaders. Mm-hmm. So if self-governance is a real kind of underlying issue, that has massive implications for us as leaders in businesses, and for that generation becoming leaders. So I really wanted to take a dive into that today, Becky, and explore out some of this in terms of how it's going to impact on the business, but what we can do about it as leaders, more importantly. What do you think?
It sounds great. And I think we're seeing it ourselves, aren't we, in our own business and with our clients, in terms of how the workforce, the age range of the workforce is wider than ever before. And those generations, there's so sort of anyone born mid-90s onwards coming in, and different attitudes, different approaches. So it's also how we get that team to really work well together, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing I took away from that podcast was that this is not their fault.
No.
It's very easy to look at a generation and say, oh, well, they just need to toughen up a little bit, or whatever derogatory kind of generalized comment we might want to come out with. But it came across loud and clear. This is social conditioning. This is how this generation has been conditioned by society, by parents, by government, by schools, whatever it might be. This is social conditioning. So if it's become learned behavior because it's social conditioning, that also means, in my map of the world, it can be unlearned and relearned, which means we can do something which could be beneficial to these individuals, but also to our businesses and to their futures as well. So, the angle I'm coming from is this is society's issue, And as a society, we've got to work together with different generations to make it a success, whatever that might be defined as a mean for everyone. And I think even at a basic level, given some of those, and I think we will put the link to Professor Height's article, which I shared with you, Becky,
Yeah,
because that graph which shows the effect of the mental health side for Gen Z is frightening. I looked
yeah,
at that graph and it's frightening what you see on that graph. And if we can do something to change the social conditioning to help with that as well, then I think as just members of society, we, not just as leaders but as members of society, we just have to do that.
yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And I think, it's for us to understand, because as you've already said, we are not Generation Z. That
No.
we, how do we, if we're not Generation Z, how do we really help those people, but also manage that whilst they are, developing themselves and their skills, their approaches, their attitudes. So, yeah, great topic for us to dive into. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, and to give the episode a bit of structure today, Becky, we did talk about this beforehand. We wanted to invest some time to make sure that we gave some real value and some guidance and some tips out to the listeners. And the three areas we talked about covering today, which we'll now go on and do. Now we have this knowledge. What can we do with it to help in terms of our leadership style? As you said, but we're Generation X, so we're two generations away from these people. But to me, that makes no difference. This is about humans. It's understanding other human beings. And now we have some understanding, we can do something about it. So there's, how do we lead them? What do we need to do as leaders in our businesses? The second point we will talk around will be, how do you then operate as a team on a day-to-day basis with different generations with different needs? How do we make sure that we still operate cohesively as a team? And the third
Yeah.
and final point, which I think would be useful to explore out, would be, well, how do we help prepare Gen Z to become the next generation leaders? Because if self-governance is something they've not been socially conditioned to do, how do we help them become conditioned to lead when maybe they've got some challenges around leadership because they haven't been given autonomy?
I agree. No, sounds great, Mark. So, shall we launch into the first one of those?
Yeah, let's go for it. Over to you, Becky.
Okay, so how do we act as leaders if we're not Gen Z and we see these people in our teams and we see them coming through, and really adapt our approach and recognize the challenges that we may be facing in that different attitudes, really, isn't it? And expectations of what the workplace is going to be. And I think we certainly see that, don't we? Different expectations from the recruitment stage the whole way through in terms of what these people want, need, expect, and also how quickly they will talk with their feet, in terms of if they're not getting what they need. That's it. They're pretty quick to make decisions, aren't they?
One of the things that stood out for me, which Professor Height said on the podcast, is that when he was a teacher, when he was in a university, what he noticed was that in a class of, I don't know what class size, but say 40, 50, 60 people, if one person disagreed or didn't like what you'd said, didn't have to be a highly offensive comment, didn't have to be rude, didn't have to be politically incorrect, didn't have to be based on, normal, whatever that might be. If one person took offense at something, that there was a number on their student card where they could call like a helpline and make a complaint. And he said effectively then it would be a full investigation. So almost this sort of entitlement to be offended is inbuilt in the system. And as leaders, as you're saying, these people vote with their feet. Now in education, they would just go to the dean or whatever and make the complaint. But in our businesses, they would walk. Probably they wouldn't necessarily. It's the old thing, isn't it? Whatever, 66% of people don't complain if they have a bad meal in a restaurant, they just don't go back again. And maybe that's kind of happening here as well, which is if we inadvertently offend these individuals, they're going to walk. Now wouldn't it be very easy to say, well, it's their problem, not mine, because it wasn't, and one person out of 50 took offense at it because it upset them. Well, don't care about that. But I'm not sure we can take that attitude.
You can, or you can say, they've just been oversensitive and they need to toughen up and get with the real world and that kind of thing. But that blanket approach it's not going to work, is it? Because that's not how we're going to win hearts and minds and move forwards with this at all. And it's really about us recognizing, as you said at the outset, this isn't anyone's fault or not their fault. It is a societal issue that we need to now manage and work with to be able to get, and we'll come on to talk about this more, but get the team functioning as well as it can do as well. Help us help those individuals, and recognizing it is the key part, I think. I mean, there's huge generalizations in this as well, isn't there? Because obviously there's a huge range of individual attitudes within Generation Z, so we are generalizing here. And again, we see that some have been exposed to more experiences and been allowed to fall off their bike and get muddy and dirty, if you like, if we're using that analogy, because their family have taken that view, and others have very much been protected. And my daughter's 17. She knows her rights in the education situation, for example. She's very much like, you can't say that. And I did. And that's their whole attitude. I have you can't say that. So everything shifted from how we were brought up.
Yes, that's really interesting. So Becky, I don't have kids. I have two dogs. They are definitely Generation Z because of when they were born. But I don't know if this applies to dogs as well. But you have a human child, so that means you have some insight into this. So just by that comment, they are easily offended, and they feel they have the right to be offended. You see that.
Absolutely. And they will call you out on stuff that you and I would probably never, and it doesn't make it right or wrong, but we just wouldn't have said to our parents. So, and it's initially you go, well, I'm your parent, you can't speak to me like that. And they're very much, it's drummed into them all the time about their rights as individuals, which I completely agree with. It's just how they then take that out into the real world, into the big wide world, and interact with people from lots of generations and make that work. Because some people would comment that they come across as entitled. They think that everything should come to them. Again, generalizing hugely, but these are comments that you do hear. And I see, living with a 17-year-old, how you could reach that view. The flip side of it is, though, they're very focused, they're very well informed. If they choose to be, they are exposed to a broad range of views, but then social media can then narrow that down in terms of the herd mentality aspect. So I think there is still, a massive difference between how you and I were probably raised and came through our careers, and how these individuals are coming to the workplace and their attitude, even from the outset, as soon as they leave, A-levels or unis, very well informed.
So interesting question here then, Becky. You're a leader in our business as a partner, and you're a leader in your life of your daughter, if you like. So tips here for leaders in business as well. How do you manage? Because we were saying there about Professor Height and how he basically just turned his back on education because it was just anything which someone took offence at would be an investigation, and he just didn't. So he went off and wrote more books and did some really good stuff. That's not an option if you're running a business. Well, it is. You could just say, I'm going to close the door, but it's not really an option, is it? So as leaders, we're going to have a more sophisticated way to deal with this. How do you deal with, so as an example, or as examples, if you've got more than one, how do you deal with Ellie? How do you deal with your daughter when this happens? So I'm just thinking, could we map some of your experiences across into what leaders could then bring into the workplace for how they deal with it? Do you indulge the conversation? Do you try and bring a balance to it? Do you say it's an open door policy, Ellie? If you've got anything that you find mildly offensive, which I've ever said, just tell me. I mean, how do you play it? Because I think there could be, I'm the generation X here with no kids, and I'm probably like, well, they just need to stop. They just need to stop being offended by everything. Just choose to not be offended by everything. That would be my kind of like take on it, which is clearly not a great one. So let's hear from the voice of reason and experience.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure. I think, well, like most things in life, stopping and pausing before you react is really important, both when you're parenting or in the workplace, leading a team, because it's very easy to just sort of react from your core, isn't it? From your values, from your beliefs, how you were brought up. Why can't everyone be like me? I remember one of our esteemed partners saying to me, Becky, not everyone thinks like you. And that has stayed with me. But it's so true in terms of you do have to stop, you have to breathe, you have to think, and you have to, particularly with a 17-year-old, hopefully not so much with the people in the workplace, and if they're a parent-child relationship, they're going to react to you as soon as you say anything. It's an open door to just like go, "Ah." But yeah, it's about it, and it depends on the situation and your mood at the time as well, obviously, your levels of tolerance. But again, in the workplace, hopefully that's something you're maybe more in control of. Parenting's pretty tough. You just have to kind of try and reason, I think. I think you also have to set boundaries. You cannot just go, this is how it is, and I have to bend entirely to this, because there is a wider team that you have to, you've got to balance it, haven't you? I think the role of a parent, the role of a leader, is to expose people to challenges so that they develop their ability to deal with those. And if you're going to protect them from everything, every time they come up against something, they are going to find it too hard. So there is a very fine balance. Your natural reaction is to want to protect, of course. You can't do that in any leadership role, can you? We talk about we have to give our people the opportunities to develop, and by taking them out of their comfort zone, and it's only when you're in a difficult situation that you learn to deal with it, and then you often look back, don't you, and go, wow, if someone had said to me I was going to be able to do that, I wouldn't have thought I would, but I did. And so I think it is about gradually pushing the boundaries of what these Generation Z people have been exposed to previously, and understanding, particularly in the workplace, they're all coming in from different points, aren't they? Different upbringings, different ways of thinking, whereas at least I'm only dealing with one child at home, and I kind of know how she's been brought up.
Yeah. So do you give? So just thinking about the point on, they can easily be offended by something, or they can choose to be offended by something.
Yeah.
Do you have to create an environment which allows Ellie to express that? And as you say, maybe slightly different when it's in a home situation, or does she need a conduit to allow that to happen, or does she just do it anyway? So just thinking about in the business place, from your experience, Gen Zs, if they're offended by something, are they going to come marching into my room and say, Mark, I was offended by this? Or should I as a leader be creating an environment which allows them to indulge that? Because if they don't, it's going to fester. So how do we best draw that out? Because we can't ignore it, because we know it's going to pee them off and they're probably going to leave. So how do you think we best draw that out? Do we need a formal process? Will it just happen? What do you think?
I think it's about creating a culture, isn't it, where it's okay. Because again, these people are still individuals. You've got some people who are far more forthright in their opinions. So it's not that all Generation Z are naturally confident and able to express. Some of them will. And Ellie is probably one of those. She's very much like, she's got an opinion, she'll let you know. And we see that in our teams, don't we? And then others probably wouldn't say anything, but may decide that they need to take action in other ways, i.e. vote with their feet. So we need to create this culture where it's okay, but balance that with not every niggle is going to turn into a massive issue. There is some stuff that we just have to roll with, and it's parenting's like that a bit, isn't it? And in terms of you have to let some stuff go, and I think as whatever our role in a team, you have to, it's just not worth it. Some of the small stuff, you just have to let it go.
So it sounds to me like maybe the big takeaway from the first point here is, how do we lead them, was almost the kind of intro to this part of it. Well, from what you've said, Becky, it sounds like it's so important that we create a culture of openness around this stuff. And whilst we might think, oh, for God's sake, it'd be very easy to think, oh, here we go again, Frida, whatever they're called, come in, oh, here we go, they're offended by this again because they didn't put milk in their coffee or whatever. It's like, but if that offends them, it offends them. So it's no good trying to push our values onto them. We need to create a culture where they feel that their voice is heard. And if they're offended, they're offended. It's their choice to be offended. We allow that to happen, but there's a conduit, there's a culture where they can express that in the right way, because we don't want it to be a moany culture. We want it to be a positive culture. So we just need to create an environment where they feel safe and protected to come out and say that to the right individuals.
Yeah, I think that's entirely it. And I have this conversation with Veli frequently. You can have a very valid point. It's how you communicate it, which will often affect how the individual you're speaking to will receive it. So, if you go about things appropriately and we've created the culture where they're able to do that, then it's win-win, isn't it? We're aware, we can do something about it. We're all conscious of these different attitudes, views, and we can work with it. If you're just going to blurt it out and not have any accountability yourself, or understanding that there will be different views in the room, then that's tougher. So I think that's a skill that we probably need to encourage in our people, to be understanding of each other. And that comes on probably onto the next point that we're going to talk about, in terms of all these different generations working together.
Yeah. Do you know what? This so far, this has been incredibly educating for me as well, because I think, I'm an old git. You can see that from the screen. And
We're the same age.
and I do at times, although I'm an open-minded individual and I like to think that I'm a caring, sharing leader, and I give people time and I'll listen to what they're saying, I do find myself at times thinking that is such trivia. That is such trivia. I can't. Which means if I'm thinking it, my body language must be expressing it. So, for me, I've realised that it might be trivia to me, but because I'll go home sometimes and say to Glenda, "You're not going to believe what someone said to me in the office today," and because Glenda is also a Generation X, and we'll go, oh, "What's wrong with them?" And so for me, just talking this through with you today, Becky, and having read the article by Professor Height, it's made me realise this is a societal issue, and I need to be less judgmental and more tolerant, which I am outwardly, but I need to be inwardly as a leader more tolerant and accepting of this, because if not, my body language and my tone is not going to be congruent with the words I'm saying. So I need to be really careful with this. So that's a big lesson for me today. So great. Hopefully other people are, who are listening to this are thinking, oh, I recognize that. And if we can make that one small change in how we think about it and process it as non-Gen Z, then I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
Okay, so moving on to the second one, as you say, I think we blurred some of this, so we're going to touch on it. But the second one is, well, how do we operate on a day-to-day basis as an overall team when we've got this going on? And I'm not sure there's huge amounts to add into this one. I think a lot of it came out in the first thing, which is we as the leaders need to create this culture within the team, because millennials are going to feel different to us as Gen X, but equally they're going to feel different to Y as well, Z as well. Sorry, so millennials are Ys, so millennials and Zs are going to feel different about this. We just need to create that culture where everyone recognizes that people are coming at it from different angles. Just because someone is offended by something doesn't mean that it's a bad reflection, because the other thing you could imagine happening here is someone in the team says something which is on any map of the world other than a Z is non-offensive, but the person doesn't like it because, I don't know, someone's gone out and said, well, I don't, I'm going to carry on using my manual pad rather than the computer because I don't really care if it's another tree that gets cut down. That now someone could easily say that in an office, bit of a throwaway comment, and quite understandably, and I know we're generalizing as you said, but a Gen Z could turn around and think, hang on a minute, you don't care about the future of the planet. What about the biodiversity? What about, climate change, blah, blah, blah. I can't believe my colleague has said that. So that minor point, but they could get really offended by it, and that could then cause friction in the team. So I think the first point around us as leaders, just taking everything as neutral, going, okay, if this person is offended by it, then it's, to use modern language, it's my bad. I shouldn't have said it if it offended somebody else. Therefore, I need to learn from that, and I need to think about my language going forwards in how to, it doesn't mean I shouldn't still have an expression of views. This is not about censorship, but it's
No.
just about trying to be thoughtful to other people's needs as well, isn't it? So I think that's culture again, isn't it? We as leaders have got to demonstrate that and show and lead by example. We've got to lead by example on this one,
Yeah.
and it's not about going out of our way to accommodate, but it's just about creating a safe environment for everybody.
It is absolutely. I mean, when I think back to both you and I have sort of developed our careers with the same firm, and how it used to be, and the banter that would be thrown around, and what was said 20 years ago compared to what would be said now in the workplace, and how views and what's accepted has changed. But there are people who are, as we are, in the business from 20 years ago, and I'm sure that's true of many of our listeners. And so we've had to adapt our ways, we've had to adapt our styles in terms of what's deemed acceptable, what's appropriate, etc. And sometimes we slip up, we know we do. But again, it's about that culture of understanding that there are a more diverse range of ages, attitudes, opinions in the room, probably, and that what used to be okay probably isn't. That doesn't mean that we have lost our sense of humour, or you can't say anything anymore. But also, it doesn't mean, for me, you can't just turn around and go, oh well, they need to grow a thick skin, or they just need, I was being funny, it was a joke, is the sort of thing that we can hear, isn't it? It was an off the cuff comment, they took it the wrong way, and I think we just need to be very aware that of what we say and how we do treat others. That's such a benefit, isn't it? All of those different people coming together in a team, that to not have that appropriate culture is a real risk to the business, and it's a real risk to us as leaders. So we've got to make it happen, because all of the benefits of bringing those people together could be lost otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. And when you think about, if a comment was made about, one of us a few years ago, and it wasn't nasty, vindictive, it was, a bit in inverted commas jokey, that would be the end of it. There'd be no more
Yeah.
to it. But we didn't grow up in an environment where, you know, something got put on a social media platform and we effectively got trolled over it, and suddenly you could have hundreds or thousands of people like weighing in on it. That didn't happen in our day. It would be one comment and it would be gone into the ether, never to be seen again. Where this stuff now can just manifest itself through the social media platforms. But also it's the other way around. It's about acceptance as well, isn't it? Which is, if you put a post up and no one likes it, suddenly people are feeling undervalued, or
Yeah.
maybe that they feel like maybe they got it wrong, or no one likes them, or whatever it might be, because they haven't had 10, 20, 40, 50 people like their post or their comment. I mean, I get that bit a bit. If I put we get a bit competitive on our LinkedIn post. It's like, oh, I've had 743 impressions on this one, but it's like, come on, please, someone comment on it, someone comment, please, someone like it, so even as a Generation X, I see a little bit of that even using LinkedIn, which is the only social media I use now. I've cleansed myself of social media, but I get that. And when you live your social life through social media, which this generation tends to do, it just amplifies it, doesn't it? So I think if we put it in that context and it comes back to the team, it's not about what happens in the team, is it? It's effectively reflective of what's happening in their social lives on social media.
Yeah.
And when something happens in the real world, it's no different. It's exactly the same. So that's why I think we have to be really careful with this. So I think coming back to the team on a day-to-day basis, we've talked about how we deal with it as leaders, and the next part of it is we have to then impart that culture into the team. We have to make this an acceptable way of doing business on a day-to-day basis for the overall team. So,
Yeah.
Becky, if we're then going to move into the third point, which is how do we prepare Gen Z to be future leaders, off the basis that they haven't generalized, haven't had to experience self-governance. How on earth do we do that?
It's a tough one, isn't it? And, again, what's often in my mind is that comment that was made to be about not everyone thinks like you. So it's not a case of we've got to turn a Gen Z into a replica of us. It can't be that. It's got to be recognizing that that this is what they've been exposed to previously. We were brought up differently, been exposed to different experiences. Neither is right, neither's wrong, probably. It's about what we need in our leaders of the future. How do we encourage those attributes? How do we allow them to develop those skills, and recognizing that they're coming at it from a different angle? And none of us none of us are the finished article, but indeed, you and I have both been on huge personal development journeys. We're very open and honest about that. And I think it's about promoting that culture of continuous learning, exposing yourself to different things, putting yourself in different situations that take you out of your comfort zone for you to develop your leadership skills. And if we can demonstrate, I think we demonstrate that. We're very open about that, aren't we, with our teams? But if as leaders we can allow them the space to do that, is probably key. And the time as well. Personal development in whatever guise is often put to the bottom of the list because we're busy. And I think it's really, really important that it's given, is made a priority, and that we allow them time and they recognise the importance of that as well. But it's about that open and honest conversation as well, I guess, about how, what areas do we need to work on together to get you to where you want to be, to where we need you to be over a period of time.
Yeah, because I mean, the two things that are in my head around this one, and there's probably more, but the two which spring to mind as a leader, I'm thinking through my own eyes, obviously. One is resilience. Having resilience as a leader is so important, because you're getting knocked all the while. You're getting knocked from your clients, you're getting knocked from your fellow business owners, you're getting knocked from your clients. There's a lot of knocking going on. That sounds wrong, doesn't it? That could have connotations.
Speak for yourself.
we might want to cut that bit. I don't know. Perhaps producer Lizzie will leave me. We mean hard knocks in life. Not really even hard knocks, but you're getting constantly like little negativity things happening, aren't you? And it's tough at times. So you have to build up a level of personal resilience to deal with that. Otherwise, it does knock you down. It cripples you, doesn't it? And the thing that concerns me, which I think is one big area that we need to work on, probably, is given that frightening graph which Professor Haidt brought up around, the mental health challenges of Gen Z. How does that map into personal resilience? Because if they don't develop that, leadership could become torturous for them, and it would be unfair to put them into that position. So I think there's a real piece working with our Gen Z teams on the whole team anyway, and it's something we've worked on a lot, especially through the COVID pandemic, which is personal resilience. How do we build personal resilience? What can we do to put ourselves in a better shape mentally to have more mental toughness, I guess. Maybe toughness is the wrong word, but it's more mental resilience. Resilience is the word, isn't it? So I think there's a real piece. Whatever you're doing yourself around resilience, I think as leaders and helping the next generation become leaders, we have a serious piece of work to do as business owners on how to help people build up their own resilience. So that's one part. But also the second part of it was the whole thing around the self-governance. If this generation has not been prepared by society to self-govern, then it's very difficult to be a leader in a business if you're not self-governing, because you're having to take chances, you're having to make decisions, you're having to calculate what could go wrong, what could go right, where do we place this one at, and if they're not used to self-governing, taking big decisions and tough decisions is going to weigh back onto the resilience side again. If they're already feeling a bit fragile about it and uncomfortable, it's going to really weigh in on the mental health side again. So I'm looking at it that I think how we help Gen Z build resilience, which they will have to build. They will need it for their own benefit, but also then how the governance kicks in as well. So they are leaders. There's no one to blame. You've got to. It comes back to we've mentioned it millions of times on this podcast, and I've told you not to exaggerate, Mark. But the Jocko Willink and Leif Babin book, Extreme Ownership. You have to take ownership as the leader. It's all on your shoulders, and it's unfair for people if they're not used to self-governance. How on earth can they take ultimate ownership on decisions? It's going to be a completely alien concept. It's always going to be, well, actually, it's somebody else's fault, or this, I need someone else to take the decision on this one. So we've got to break that as well somehow. We've got to give them the confidence and the skill sets to be able to do that. I think maybe I'm talking here as a Gen X leader. I just struggle to conceptually understand how you can be a leader if you don't have resilience and if you haven't got self-governance. Am I missing something there, Becky? I know
No,
you're
I
Gen X
completely
as well, so
agree. Yeah, no, and I think we've both been on different journeys and had different challenges along the way, but we are both Gen X, and I think probably for me, it's about being honest with our future leaders, with our Gen Z people, about how the things that we've faced, because everyone's coming at this from a different point, obviously, but that we've had to work on some of this stuff as well, and that it's okay to do that, and it's not that we were fully resilient when we started on this journey at all, and we're always working on that and having to work on it. And I think that personal investment and recognizing that you have to own it, as you said, you have to live consciously, and you have to recognize the bits that you do need to work on, and that it's not going to be handed to you on a plate. Now, we hear this, don't we, about, they expect everything to be handed to them on a plate. And again, I think it's about recognizing that some are coming into the workplace, into our businesses with expectations. It's not that they can't be met, it's just that they have a role to play in meeting that as well. We always say to our people, don't we, that their development technically or personally, their soft skills is as much their responsibility as it is ours, and they need to own it. And I stand by that. Whatever generation you are, you cannot expect someone else to do it all for you, and neither should you. And you can't blame someone else if it doesn't happen. So it's about creating that culture where they can speak up if they don't think they're having the opportunities, able to develop, for example, but also taking ownership and investing their time. I mean, that's another thing, isn't it? In terms of, I've observed that some kind of expect to be allowed time in the working day to do all of this. There's no personal investment, if you like. There's no extra effort outside of the standard working day, because if it's related to work, it has to happen in work. This is about building ourselves as individuals and for every aspect of our lives. And whether you choose to read, listen to podcasts, or how you expose yourself to different stuff, it's not all just going to fit in your 7.5-hour working day. It's kind of going to be how you live. It's interesting. My 17-year-old is constantly listening to podcasts. I mean, it's just, they're on all the time. She's very politically motivated, if that's the right term. She's very interested, but that's where they get their information from. And it's just about how using that to invest in yourself, I think, is really important. And we both advocate continuous learning, and we need to promote that to our people all the time.
Do you know what? One of the things I'm thinking seriously off of the back of this one is, one of the things that I'm definitely going to invest in and look into whether this would work is, I don't think just sending Gen Z on courses is going to help with this stuff, because it's just theory. I think we need some. I think we need some, in inverted commas, battlefield experience here. So one of the things I think I can do as a leader to help the next generation leaders is to probably get them to come out into more environments with me. So they're not in the firing line, but they get to see what goes on. So take, for example,
in a safe place.
So take, for example, a client meeting. If I'd kept score over the last 17 years or whatever it is, 16, 17 years as a partner in this business, and the probably thousands of client meetings I've had, if I kept a note of every time a client said something to me that I could have chosen to take offense of, I probably wouldn't have many clients left if I'd have called them out on it. So there's two things I'm thinking. One is, maybe I should have called them out on it. So maybe I should have just said, hey, that was, I chose to be offended by that comment, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client or whatever, so maybe I should have called them out, is the first thing. But equally, if a Gen Z sees that, and then we have a debrief after the meeting and they're like, I cannot believe you didn't get offended by what that client said to you, then we can talk it through. Maybe talking it through can then kind of start to meet this somewhere in the middle. So that could be one thing. And then the second thing off the back of that is role play. Massive fan of role play ever since, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but ever since Sir Clive Woodward talked about the importance of role play in the England rugby team when he won the World Cup, when he was the coach, when we won the World Cup in 2000 or whenever it was. And because he said, when you put people into a pressure situation in a classroom through role play, they react psychologically exactly the same as they do when they're actually out on the pitch. So I think maybe there's a bigger pace in here for using role play within our office environments and our business environments to maybe just start to get people used to maybe a slightly different way of having to work, if indeed they want to. I mean, maybe the next generation leaders, Becky, are going to say, I will only deal with clients who never offend me. I think it's unlikely. But who knows? That might be the future reality, and people are more selective over who they do business with.
Possibly, and I mean, we see that coming through already, don't we? In terms of businesses being more selective about who they're dealing with. Generally, you know, we've been talking about B Corp and things like that as a partnership, certainly. So I think values and beliefs probably are going to have an even bigger part in how we do business going forwards. I mean, fundamentally, that's what we all apply to our everyday lives anyway. But it's about tolerance for me, and just accepting that everyone comes at it from a slightly different position, and it might be generational, it might be lots of things. Everyone's belief system is different, and we have to have that tolerance. If we don't expose our people to these things, then how are they ever going to understand and learn? So I completely agree with you. I think the shadowing at client meetings or whatever it might be, invaluable. You've got to have a red line, haven't you, what you will tolerate. You know, clients can challenge us, quite rightly, but clearly there is a line that would be crossed that we wouldn't tolerate. Is that line in a different place maybe for Gen Z? Probably. Do they need to move it? Not necessarily, but they need to understand how to react in that sort of situation, what's appropriate in terms of, you know, how you do behave. And I'm not saying you have to accept it, but how you deal with it, how you would manage it is important. And that's skills that you only learn from observing and doing, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think the one thing we're definitely concluding here is there is no desire, and in fact, we shouldn't try and turn Gen Zs into Gen X leaders like us. This is not saying, and they need to look like us, but it is just saying, do you know what? That this is all degrees of, isn't it? And maybe we've been too tolerant as Gen X leaders in the past with, you know, certain situations, and we could learn stuff from you know, Gen Z on this. Maybe we should be less tolerant in certain areas, and we should be offended more in certain areas. But then maybe they need to move a little bit as well. So I think this is a bit of give and take, I suspect, like most things in life, isn't it? And somewhere there's a compromise which is going to be comfortable enough for everybody, and maybe that's the best we can achieve as leaders at the moment in terms of the next generation, without radically changing the fabric of our businesses. Because you mentioned vision and values there. If we were going to completely move over to how Gen Z operates as a business, we would have to revisit and completely rewrite our vision and values. That's unlikely to happen, which means, you know, this life tends to be about compromise, doesn't it? As you said, it's tolerance, it's compromise, and what we can't do is we can't go, well, we're the senior leaders here, therefore our way is right and yours is wrong and it's my way or the highway. We have to be prepared to probably be more flexible than we've ever been in our lives by just looking at it, as you say, from different angles, being far more tolerant and just finding some middle ground somewhere.
And I think that middle ground is really important because, you know, in inverted commas, we're not pandering to this snowflake, in inverted commas again, generation. It's about understanding each other and, like you say, the tolerance aspect, and also then being realistic about how we can work as a team to achieve the best outcome. And there's
Yeah.
massive positives that the different approaches will bring, and it's how we blend that together, isn't it,
Yeah.
to achieve the best for all of us. And of course,
Definitely.
business will look different going forwards under the leadership of what are now Gen Z, the same as under the leadership of us. It looks different to how it did 20 years previous. That's perfectly natural. How we get there is, again, like you say, it's a gradual process, and understanding each other and taking the time, and having tolerance, and just sometimes pausing. It's that pause button, isn't it, that's
Yeah.
important, I think.
Yeah. Do you know what, Becky? I mean, I would love if any of the listeners have got contacts or indeed are Gen Z leaders themselves. And as we said, we are not claiming to be experts on this topic. We are Gen X, and we are blinkered. We are blind. We are our map of the world is blinkered by all of that. We're trying to look outside of that. We're trying to be tolerant. We're recognizing there are some challenges here for leaders today, for leaders tomorrow, and for the teams in which we're operating. And if there's anyone out there who is an expert in this area or has lived and breathed this themselves, then please reach out to us, because we would love to have you as a guest on the show to put the Gen Z side and help us understand how can we do this better. And so what I'm not looking for is, I'm not looking for another Professor Jonathan Haidt cracking podcast, as I said, but I don't want Jonathan Haidt on our podcast being another Gen X expert talking about Gen Z. I would love to have a Gen Z expert who is Gen Z talking to us about this, because I think this topic is going to go on, and it's massive. It's a huge topic in the transition of leadership in businesses over the next decade. And I think we need to get an expert on here who can really flesh this out further than what we have today. We've given it from our side of the fence what we think would work.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it from the other angle.
And it's so important to all of us, isn't it? Both in terms of developing future leaders, but just retaining the really core people in our business, the good people, and attracting the right people as well. And if we don't get it right, if we don't work out what we need to be doing, we're going to really, really struggle.
Brilliant. Okay, Becky. Well, I think we've talked around that topic quite a lot today. Surprisingly, we had a lot to say on it, considering we don't purport to be experts on it. But it was very much genuinely our thoughts and how we feel and how we see it from our from all of our blind spots as well. So the three areas we covered today, just to remind everyone, was how do we lead Gen Z, and we gave some thought around that. And I think, Becky, your word on that one was, it's very much around the culture. It's creating an open culture where people can come and talk, and we as Gen Z don't get offended by what they're saying, and we listen to it seriously. Even if we think, can't believe you're offended by that, we need to put that aside. We need to reserve judgment. So I think that was the first big thing that came out as what we can do as leaders. The second point was, well, how do we get the team to operate and function well on a day-to-day basis with all of this going on in the mix? And I think that really flowed from the first point, which is culture. Culture, as you would say,
Culture.
Becky. If we got the culture right,
Yeah.
and everyone understood why we were doing this, then it would really help with the team ethos and the team understanding each other. So I think we could play a big part in making that happen as well. And the third point was around, how do we prepare the Gen Z generation for leadership of the future? And we talked around resilience, we talked around the self-governance point, and the fact that maybe we can do things to just help move their position slightly, but equally we have to move as well. We have to recognize that, some clients we've dealt with, they won't deal with. They're just not going to accept that. So we have to be tolerant of that as well. So it's working together. It's recognizing our differences, and it's celebrating our differences as well, and then finding the common ground that we can move towards to make it workable, and to help them have an easier ride as leaders of the future as well.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to make it harder for any of us than it needs to be. So
absolutely,
we're all about, we want to give people a leg up, don't we? Pass on, pay it forward, etc. So why would we not want to do this?
Yeah, pick people up, don't put them down. I think that's the phrase that we want to use here, isn't it? So brilliant. So that brings us to the end of today's podcast. Thank you for listening to us today. If you like the show, please rate and review us. Give us 5 stars on the platform of your choice. It really helps other people find us. And as we said, all links are in the show notes, so please take a look at those. Finally, a massive thank you to our sponsors, Larkin Gowan. Without you, the show wouldn't be possible. take a look at their website to see how their team of experts can help you and your business. So Becky, that just leaves us to say to everyone, have a great week, be kind to yourself and boost your health, wealth and self.